started now. It's 3:30, and I'm Jane Hershey, CitySprouts Director, the CitySprouts School Garden Program here in Cambridge and Boston. And I am delighted to welcome you to our third CitySprouts Teacher Forum session, part of a series of 5 sessions. And we are really excited about what we hope building and supporting and nurturing a community of practice among teachers who are using their gardens for teaching, both teachers who are doing it actively, teachers who want to hear more about it. We want questions. We love your comments. We're really hoping that this becomes a platform where you all can share your best practices directly with each other. So today we have 2 teachers who are going to present to us about how they use their school gardens. And I'm excited to introduce you to them. Before we get started though, let me just give you a couple of reminders about our platform today for this session, these series. We are recording today's session, and the recording will be posted on our website, citysprouts.org, along with the other 2 sessions that are already there, and you can find them on the Teacher Forum page. So if you wanted to go back and listen to session 1 or 2, you can do that. I think you need to download them, but if you have any issues or problems, please let us know. Secondly, we have a lot of people on the call today. We're thrilled about that. And we've muted everyone's audio except for our presenters, just so that we can limit background noise. And if those of you who have been listening to the traffic sounds from my phone, which is not muted, you'll understand why. Sorry about that. And then I want to say again that this forum is about your questions and comments and shared experience. And we really want you to participate. So even though the audio is muted, please use the chat board down in the right-hand corner. Some of you are introducing yourselves, and that's really great. That's also the place for you to ask questions, make comments, something that you'd like me to repeat for you. I'd be really happy to do that. And I think that that's the background. So let me say again, welcome to CitySprouts Teachers Forum, session number 3. And we will go ahead and get started. So moving on to our slides here. I am Jane Hershey. I am the director of CitySprouts School Garden Program in Cambridge and Boston. We've been working with Cambridge Public Schools since 2001, and we've added 4 Boston school partners over the last couple of years. Our mission is to build schools' capacity to integrate edible gardens as a teacher's resource and to connect young people to nature where they live and their food systems. So our notion is that kids are going to get access to that school garden if teachers use it. And teachers are going to be able to use it if it really does connect with what they have to teach with their curriculum. So your practice as a teacher is really critical to making this be a living, sustainable, rich experience for kids. This Teachers Forum, new this fall, is a way for teachers to share their practices with each other. We're in the middle of it on 3 out of 5. We've had up to 4 teachers presenting. Today we've got a couple, and we're really looking forward to your questions and comments. Okay, we've got 3 presenters today. Holly Rosa, who is with Boston Public Schools. She is the Assistant Director for Implementation from the Science Department in Boston. And thank you so much for joining us today, Holly. And then after Holly speaks, we've got 2 more teachers who will be presenting. Rosalind O'Sullivan, a junior kindergartner teacher here in Cambridge at the Fletcher Maynard Academy. And then Isabel Eccles, 5th grade teacher at Cambridge Port School, also in Cambridge, who will be talking about simple machines. And okay, Holly, I am thrilled that you're with us. Here you go.
Hi.
Handing the audio over to you.
Hi, and thank you so much for having me here today. So like you said, my name is Holly Rosa, and I'm the Assistant Director of Implementation for the Science Department for Boston Public Schools. And I'm speaking to you today on behalf of Pam Pelletier, the Director of Science. She is very sorry that she couldn't make it today. So Boston Public Schools values the school gardens, schoolyards, and outdoor classrooms. Teachers use these outdoor learning spaces to support and enhance the science curriculum. When students participate in gardening activities at school, they are inspired to start container gardens at home, which is so cool. These spaces allow students to make observations, ask questions, and collect data about the natural world. They become more aware of natural phenomenon that's around them. As a department, we value the outdoor learning connection. And if you Google the FOSS newsletter, Boston and their outdoor learning spaces are featured in the fall 2014 newsletter. So I would like to leave you today with a couple thoughts. When thinking about expanding your outdoor learning areas, make sure you preserve your existing outdoor spaces, whether it be a garden, an outdoor classroom, or a patch of milkweed. A single milkweed plant is actually an entire ecosystem and important to the environment. Endangered species like monarch butterflies lay their eggs on the back of milkweed leaves. And over time, new populations start to appear in these outdoor learning spaces. So animals like grasshoppers can all of a sudden appear after never being in this particular area. And this provides the students with new learning experiences. As a teacher, I had the opportunity to help create a school garden at my school. I worked alongside with my colleagues and my students to build planting beds, shovel dirt, and plant seeds. 2 years later, the impact on the community has been amazing. Families volunteer every summer to water the garden and harvest vegetables. The neighbors wave to us when we're outside digging in the dirt with the kids, pulling weeds and planting seeds. The students know the plant life cycle, and they love to share with me all their observations of how the plants change throughout the seasons. So having a school garden can make such an impact not only on the school community, the local community, but on children for the rest of their lives.
Oh, thank you so much, Holly, for that. The picture that we're looking at behind Holly's words is the Mather Outdoor Classroom, which is one of the Boston schoolyards. And Holly, I did not realize that FOSS was featuring Boston in its newsletter, but I do know that the FOSS website has a series of outdoor lessons, and you don't need a garden to teach in them, that Boston Schoolyard and Boston Science Department helped develop. And I'd just like to take a minute here, and I'll put this down in the chat box when I'm not talking, how you can access those really exciting lessons. So even though our focus in this series is on gardens and edible learning gardens, it's always a great reminder, and thank you, Holly, for this, that you don't actually need a garden to be teaching outside, and just how much you can use things like milkweed for. That's a really wonderful image. So I will put that information for the Boston Schoolyard Initiative and FOSS down in that corner, and encourage all of you to check out those resources. Okay, so we've got a couple of teachers, and we're going to move on to the two teachers who are with us today, who are going to be sharing their science lessons in the garden. And our first presenter is Rosalind O'Sullivan. Welcome, Rosalind. We're thrilled to have you with us, who is a junior kindergarten teacher at the Fletcher Maynard School. And she and Isabel are both veteran garden users. Rosalind is going to tell us about how she has, for a couple of years now, done this unit with her students on worms in their very urban schoolyard garden. So Rosalind, Mike is going to hand the slides over to you, and please tell us about your lesson.
Okay, well, hello everybody. As James said, my name is Rosalind O'Sullivan. I'm a junior kindergarten teacher in Cambridge. My children are all 4 years old. They come in at 4. and they all turned 5 in the room. We have two gardens that we use. We use a school garden and we use a community garden, which is very close to us. It's a big part of our science curriculum. The children and I adopt a tree in the garden, and we go over several times a week to see our tree and also to dig in the garden and plant, and we also help to clean up the garden when it's time to close it up for the winter time. Every year the children are very excited about worms, and they love watching them. So I decided a few years ago that we would do a unit on worms. So first, I reread the chapter on worms and shadows and whirlpools in Jane Worth's book, which was very good. It really helped me focus out what I wanted to do. And then I talked to the children about being a naturalist, which is a scientist who studies plants and animals outdoors. And my children were very excited. They were going home and telling everybody at home that they were a naturalist. So we made a chart. We talked about what we knew about worms and what we wanted to learn about worms. And then we had quite a few discussions on the importance of respecting the worms' homes and their natural habitats, and how would children feel if someone very large came into their homes. So we spent a lot of time talking about practicing safe ways, also to use the tools, the digging tools that we had to dig with the worms. And we talked that the children learned to pick up the worms without hurting them. So children were very careful about that. They saw a peer not being as careful as he or she should be. They quickly reminded them. So then we made some rules before we went out. We said we have to be gentle, do not hurt the worms, dig very carefully because you don't want to be bumping into another worm, share your tools and digging space, and remember you're a visitor in someone else's home. And all these are things that you work on every year, but in kindergarten it's really important to learn to work together. So this is another way of building our community and sharing and working together. And before we went outside, we reviewed again how to treat the worms. And when we got to the garden, we broke into groups. And each group used its tools to look for worms. And anyone who found a worm, oh my gosh, it was so exciting. They were all calling out. We'd all have to run over and see the worm. And the child who found the worm would describe the worm and hold it very gently in his hands. And sometimes he'd give a name to it. The whole class rushed to meet the worms. They felt like they were part of our classroom, I think. Sorry, I've never done this before. It might be the last time.
No, you're doing great. This is really exciting.
At first, the students would dig randomly, but they became more intentional in their search, and they would notice where more of the worms would be so that they would want to focus in on that part of the garden. And then the children would draw what they found. We had science journals. They would either bring their journals with them to the garden, or they would draw the worms when we came back. And the great thing about that was that everybody can draw a worm. So we didn't have any problem with children thinking they couldn't draw the worms. And then children would dictate to me how they found the worms or something about the worms or the description of the worms, and then I would transcribe them and write them down. And later, then, we would share what everybody had written. They would be sitting in an office chair, and they would share. And the students, they loved comparing and contrasting the worms they found, whether they found partners worm might be longer or bigger, and they had a lot to say about that. And then they did conclude there were more similarities than differences in the worms that they found. Then, in the wintertime, when the first time we did this, when winter was approaching, the children were very concerned that they weren't going to be able to dig. The ground was going to be too hard. So we thought about, we built a home for worms in our classroom. So first we invited our garden coordinator to come in and talk to us about worms and what worms needed. And then the children collected good dirt and sticks, newspaper, and small scraps of food to create a home for the worms. And then we dug up 8 worms to put into our classroom terrarium. The children were very interested in this, and all year, every day, they would come in and see how the worms were doing. And a lot of the children would bring food from home, and they liked to see how much the worms had eaten or, were there a lot of leaves left, or were there a lot of plants? Which did they like better? Some people thought they liked the newspapers better. Some people thought they liked the foods that they brought from home better. So that led to a great many discussions. So throughout the winter, the children fed and observed the worms, and they drew the worms in their journals. And as I say, that was really great for them because there was no problem about being able to draw worms. And then we acted out the worms. Children would try to emulate how they felt their worms were moving, and we discovered that worms, it's a lot easier to be a worm because you can roll yourself up, you can stretch yourself out, and the children tried to do the same thing, but that was a little difficult. So in the book that Karen Worth's book, they had mentioned a slinky. So I bought a slinky, and we played around with the slinky because it really reminded us about the worms and how they move. Good. And the children, the outcome, I think, was the children were very sensitive to the worms and were quite careful in their treatment from the beginning. Over time, the children became very keen observers, and they would notice the differences, even though there were not as many differences. They would notice the differences between worms, and they were encouraged to use their own observations to answer questions like, do the worms bite? Do all the worms have lines on their body? They had lots of fun describing their own their worms. And I think studying the worms developed the children's skills in observation and reflection. And then, when it was time to bring the worms out, we put them back in the garden, and children were kind of sad to see them go. We put them back in the spring, and then when we went over to the garden, the children were convinced that the worms they saw were the ones in our classroom, and they thought that the worms actually were looking at them and that they missed them. So we had a very good time. It was lots of fun, and I think that lots of really solid learning came out of it. And it was fun. Good.
Great. Thank you, Rosalind. That's really, that's great. And we've got some questions on the bottom that I've been making note of. Before we go to Isabel, I wanted to say that I just love that physical connection that you made between your students' own bodies and the worm bodies by being worms themselves and looking at slinkies and really thinking about how they move. It's not only a way for them to empathize with the worms, but also a way to get them to notice and understand the worms in a bigger way. I think that's really a really cool connection to make. Okay, so we're going to come back to you, Rosalind, with some questions, but first we're going to hear Isabel's presentation. So Isabel, please tell us about simple machines, simple and I think complex machines too, in the garden. Welcome, Isabel.
Hi, I'm just, here's the arrow key. Okay. Hi, everybody, and thanks for inviting me to talk. I teach 5th grade at Cambridgeport, and we have been involved with CitySprouts for how many years now? At least 5 or 6 years or more. We have a really nice little, very tiny woodland garden right behind my classroom with raised beds. And we really don't have much space at this school, so CitySprouts has really used a very narrow patch very well. And we also have access to a community garden over by Fletcher Maynard School. It's about 3 blocks away. And that's the garden that we've generally been using in 5th grade. Today I'm going to talk about a very small little unit on simple machines. So this isn't based on our garden work at the community garden. It's more came from the CitySprouts people bringing apples in and making cider with the school community. So what happens with that, and so I was kind of just tucking this little unit in because I knew we were going to be making cider, and I also knew that we're supposed to teach about simple machines, and I wasn't going to do a big unit on that, so I thought, we can just pop that in right here and then get back to the bigger unit we're on, plant biology. So you can see a little picture of our garden. the back garden, and this activity took place in that area. So, and here's some more pictures. Back garden. So what I wanted the kids to get out of this was that they'd understand how different simple machines do work. And I wanted them to be able to identify the simple machines that you can find in the machinery we were using. And I did a few lessons before we went out, and a couple of the materials that helped were the way things work has some really wonderful and kind of funny illustrations of things like screw and lever and wedge that have a lot of complicated information, but they're great ways to understand the different kinds of work what things screws could do. We also used a PowerPoint that our school department has made on simple machines. And I also used some really books for younger kids. There's a little series from the Bridgestone Science Library by Anne Weisbacher. So there's a little book on screws and a little book on levers. And we actually have a couple of those books. So they're really quick and easy to read. So I introduced the kids to all the lever, screw, wedge, etc. And then we also decided to do it with our kindergarten buddies. We have reading buddies. And so we went out with our reading buddies. We wanted them to be able to be fully involved in the project, but there are parts of it that are a little bit where that could be unsafe for them to do things on their own, like chopping up apples. So the students in my class would work with their buddy to help them cut an apple safely, or to help them put the apple pieces into, pour them into the different parts of the machine. So that was a really nice emotional part of the project, was helping their buddy. And so it brought out the best in my students. Here's some sample pages from that PowerPoint. And that was our garden coordinator, Alice. And you can see in the bottom left the actual cider press. And it's something we have parents come in to help out at each station as well. And it's set up where on one table they're cutting apples, and another one they're putting them through. I can't even remember all the different stations, but they do some steps before they get to the press. And you can see the kids are with, my kids are big, and they're with their younger partners. And all the kids got to be involved in every step of the way. And at the end, they get to drink the cider. And the extra assignment my students had was to draw a picture of the machine, and I labeled different simple machines they saw in it. So this is actually a complex machine, you can see, and this is how I know whether they learned about the machines when we went over it before. And a girl came to visit me who's now at the middle school, and I asked her, can I borrow your journal? She brought it back in, and I put a little sample from her journal from her drawing. And this is what she did for homework after the activity. And I asked her what she got out of it, and you can see the quote there, that she really felt like she learned about physics, and that drawing had helped it really matter to her. Seeing the machines at work rather than just on the pages of a book or in isolation meant that she really understood them. And she has appreciation for the kinds of work they can do, and she'll recognize them in other machines that she meets. Like if she can see what a screw does there, when she sees a screw in other situations, she can imagine how it's working. Part of this was at the beginning of the year, too, so I'm really trying to get the kids to use their notebooks for drawings. I want them to learn to label their drawings. I want them to be making written observations, asking questions, making connections. So I might ask, when I do this again, maybe this year at the end of this assignment to draw and write, I might ask them, does this, can you think of any other machines that have a screw in it or a lever? And I might even ask them, can you invent a new machine, make a plan for a new machine where a screw could do something to help you get important work done? I think it would be fun for them to create something of their own and plan. And a way to extend this, because we did this really quickly, I've done work on simple machines in other years, and so if you had more time and you wanted to build up to it before the cider making, a fun activity to do is just bring in a bag of kitchen utensils and put them out on, have stations. And so say two kids are sitting at this table with this, whatever, egg beater. Their job would be to draw it carefully, identify that you can see the lever, and there's a wheel, and to look at all the parts of it and draw. And then they do one, and then they can move to another table. But they really, the more hands-on experiences, the more they'll understand how they work. And then the outcomes were that they knew it mattered. They knew they were learning about simple machines because they'd be using them. I always think that when there's real work to do, kids are much more excited. And I also think the fact that they were in this particular cider press, the machines are clearly visible. They really like the responsibility, and they love helping their kindergarten buddies. And it was nice to have them doing something in addition to reading, because some kids feel great about reading to their buddies, and other kids might feel less confident. This was something that everybody could shine with. They really understood the idea of mechanical advantage, and they loved having the cider at the end. So I thought having 4 days, 4 sessions was good, but I think it would be even better with more if you had time adding in the kitchen work. And I think that might be my last slide. That's it.
Wow, great, Isabel. Thank you very much. And you have prompted a lot of questions, which is really great. So I think what I'll do is I'll start and work backwards with some of the questions that were just asked about the cider pressing. So one of the questions that was asked a couple of times, Isabel, was about 5th grade classes who don't do simple machines until the spring. And I'm wondering if you've ever had that experience. You know other teachers who aren't supposed to be doing that, or in their scope and sequence, the simple machine unit doesn't happen until spring. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, I just always find it very hard to do things when I'm supposed to. And I'm often late getting to the things I'm supposed to. So I just did this because I knew the the cider making was happening. And so I thought it's fine. Since I'm keeping it small, I think it's okay to do it now while it is relevant. And then if I want to, I can revisit it in the spring. So maybe what I would do is do a quick and dirty thing of 3 lessons where we read, we make the cider, we do class reading and discussion, and maybe I'd make a more elaborate PowerPoint. And then we make the cider, and then they have the homework, the drawing, and which again is trying to do 2 things. I'm trying to look at their keen understanding and also their ability to do nice work in their journal. And then maybe in the spring is when we would imagine, to do more with the kitchen utensils, and then maybe create your own machine, at least on paper. So I could come back to it then. I think that's what real life is like that, where things come up, you do it, and then you forget about it, and then it comes up again, and you learn more. So I think I wouldn't worry. I mean, the only problem is then you get behind with what you're supposed to be doing. Right,
so kind of as a springboard or to spiral back to it.
Yeah.
There's a question from Brad here about the PowerPoints that your students make. And he wonders if that's something that all students in the district do, or is that something that you do in your class in particular?
I think I put that down as a possible thing you could do. I didn't do that. I think that was just something you could do. Like if they do really nice drawings, then maybe we could make a PowerPoint and show it in all schools share. Or maybe students would make their own PowerPoints that have every simple machine, and they could have the citer press at the end. But certainly, it's not something I did do, but I feel like we could do it easily because we have, all the schools in Cambridge have a tech specialist who's there part of the week. And I think they would be great at helping us do that. And we might even teach us something else, like our tech person really wants to be able to teach kids how to use Prezi. And she'd much rather do it in the context of something they're learning in science than just have them do a random Prezi presentation. So I think talking to your tech person, if you have one in your school, about whether they could help you with that part of it.
Yeah, that's a good point, and we'll look down at that chat board to see if there are Boston teachers, if that's a resource that you have, or if there's some different or alternative resource that you could use to pull in that students making PowerPoints. We have a question for both Isabel and Rosalind, and maybe Rosalind, you could take a stab at answering it first. And that's just how much of your lesson was done in the garden and how much was done later in the classroom. So some of it I think were obvious, but can you, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, we spent a lot of time in the garden. I feel like my classroom, for all the curriculum, is not just the four walls. We are outside and moving around a lot. So I think that I would say probably 75% of the lesson was outside because we were observing and exploring the garden from the very first day of school, September, and even in the wintertime, we do go into the garden. We go in maybe once a week or every other week because we've adopted a tree that we're looking at, but we're in the garden a lot. So I would say about 75% of it was outside.
I feel like I'm very envious of Rosalind because we don't go over very much at all. I think just having it be a couple blocks away and being fifth grade where we have so many different subjects and they're all supposed to be a certain amount of time, that getting over there and getting back makes...
Well, it's funny because we go on a lot of field trips. We do a lot of walking. So a lot of times we're walking to Harvard Square. So we always stop on the way back and check out our tree and see what's happening and just take a little walk, stroll through the garden. So it's really a big part of our life.
And it sounds like it has much more emotional impact on your kids than if you don't go as often.
Yeah, and every time we go, they draw pictures in their journals about what they see.
So Rosalind, we have another question for you. Two questions about the worms. One is, do your students ever not find worms in the garden? And if so, what do you do?
No, we've always found worms. Sometimes we may have to look a little closer, but we have not had that problem. We have always found worms. That would be interesting. We'd have to then research where we should go to find worms because the kids are so entranced with them. But one of the reasons why we started the whole unit on worms is because they saw so many of them. And they, were just so enthusiastic about learning about them. So, we really haven't had that problem. Both gardens have worms, but the one at Squirrel Brand, the community garden, because there's so many little plots there, garden plots, I can't imagine that all the worms would leave.
Yeah, and I would just want to emphasize for those of you who don't know Cambridge and don't know the Fletcher Maynard Academy or the Cambridge Port, these are very urban gardens. And having seen the outdoor classrooms and gardens in Boston, I'll say these are two gardens that are some of the most challenged around space. And in fact, I wonder, Isabel, if you could maybe speak to the challenges of using a small urban space like that and trying to do this lesson. And there was a question out here, too, about fifth graders with their big fifth grade bodies. And is that a challenge? And how have you dealt with that?
Well, for the Apple lesson, I think we're just used to being like jammed up against walls in this school. We don't have much of a playground at all. It's just a small concrete area. And then we have this little, like the length of a sidewalk down the back, and then maybe double that is the garden. So we just are squished into that sidewalk area and back. When we do go to the garden, I think it is crowded. It's hard to find. If I take 14 kids over to the community garden, it's hard to get the kids far away enough from each other so that right now at this point in the year they can concentrate on their plant and not be kind of looking over at their friends who are just a few feet away. One of the real issues I have is having kids feel comfortable sitting down on the ground. They don't necessarily want to sit down. I
usually sit down first, and so then I get more kids to sit down if I'm sitting down.
But it's just funny. They're very some of them are very comfortable around dirt and uncomfortable out in the sun. So the first time we went out, there was just a lot of squawking about it's too hot out there. They were scared of the bees. They were, just uncomfortable sitting and Francis, I'm on a webinar, so can you do me later? My wonderful custodian. I'm being broadcast, so I have to be careful about sound. So one of the things I did after they went and had a little bit of a hard time with my classes, it's a particularly restless and squawky class right now, is we came back and we did a little study of bees, because I thought if we stop and find out a little bit more about bees and how interesting they are, then when we go back, they won't be scared of them.
I want to add, and I want to add something to this conversation from my perspective from the garden program, that a lot of kids who are really perfectly fine with insects and bugs and sitting on the dirt and touching worms when they're little change right around 5th grade, and it gets really intense in middle school, where all of a sudden you've got a whole class of kids who are squealing and running from insects when they didn't used to. So it's definitely a developmental phenomena that you're dealing with, Isabel.
Yeah. And it's funny, some years it's not an issue, and other years it is. But my class, this isn't about the cider pressing, but we went out once, and then it was a pretty hard trip. And then I think Erin's online, and she could probably say something about it to Erin Taylor. But then when I talked to them again a couple days later, they said, well, that was our first time. The next time I think we're going to be okay.
Oh, your student said that.
Yeah, one of them.
That's really interesting.
I'm out there, and we weren't used to it.
That's amazingly reflective.
It's a little sad that nature is something you have to get used to.
That's true, but it's great that they were so reflective about it. So, Rosalind, here's another question for you about the worms again. Once someone is wondering if your students ever don't treat the worms kindly, and what do you do with violent or overly exuberant treatment of worms?
Because I think that really can be an issue. Before we go out, we spend a lot of time talking about it and role model. We made worms with Play-Doh, and we acted out how we were going to act with them and how we were going to treat them. But I still think that can be an issue, and I've had that problem with sometimes with some of the children who are more aggressive than others. And first of all, I think their peers get very upset, the other children get very upset, and then sometimes I think they just need to take a break and chill out and sit out on the fence in the garden until they're ready to come back. And we spend a lot of time talking about how would you like to be treated. Because the whole atmosphere of the class, and we talk about that from day one, that we're a family, and we all work together, and we help one another, and we treat each other with respect. So we really work on that, but I can see that could be an issue. And then I think, the person needs to be spoken to gently and maybe have a little time out and then come back.
Yeah, okay, so something that definitely that's come up. I want to point out to everybody on the webinar that there's a comment down in the chat box from Erin, who's worked with Isabel's class. One thing we tried with Isabel's class was using rubber circles from the gym teacher to mark specific sitting spots to give students a visual reminder of how to space themselves out. Isabel, how did that work out?
And also, if someone doesn't want to sit on the ground directly, we could sit on the spot. But I would say that for some kids were able to settle down, and I think we need to get out there more. I mean, I think the thing holding us back is not getting out there enough, and just listening to Rosalind talk. We're probably trying to do too many things at once. But getting out there, and I had last year our class was in the garden a fair amount because we wrote a little book about the garden, and it was hard at first, and then they really got very attached to their plants. They adopted a plant, and they did a lot of research on their plant, and once they start feeling that they're doing something important and they feel expert on something, I think they start to be more focused and more proud.
Isabel, and Rosa, we've got one last question for both of you here, and maybe Isabel, you could answer first, and then we'll go to Rosalind. And that's if you could just tell us about how the garden helps your students become keen or keener observers.
Well, I think it's just the fact that it's natural, not man-made, means there's more variations and interesting things to look at. The things you're looking at it's not a computer screen, it's not a piece of furniture, there's more to see. And because in the garden things go through changes, then that's something to notice. There's just more to notice, I think. When things die and fall apart, that's a big change. We actually did some work on observational drawing in the classroom last year, and we looked at mentor drawings. I collected images from naturalist observational drawings, and so we really looked at them a lot and saw different techniques people can use. And I think drawing really helps people see. And having a particular thing to draw, something small to draw and look at, having a chance to use hand lenses and take them out there, which we're right now introducing in the classroom so that when they go out into the garden, they'll already know how to use them, but I think that can help. I think it's great when there's little bugs to see because that's something that's moving around, and but I definitely feel like it helps them to become more observant and more precise in describing what they see. So at first they might just say it's a leaf, and then they might start noticing it has serrated edges, and then they might start noticing the veins, and you could just layer in more and more ways of looking at things, going deeper and deeper. We actually are getting some help with ways to build that into the classroom we're also participating in a group called Nature and Me that is offered by the Arboretum, and that has some really nice small classroom lessons to help people take the little steps you need to go through to get good at drawing. Instead of just saying, no, now we're just going to draw the best picture we can, it actually helps them kind of move step by step through a process.
Isabel, if you can put that a link to that, or just a word that people could search down in the chat box about the Arboretum resource. I think people would really love to have that.
Yeah, we did a great class. We got you apply to do it, and if you get in, it's free, and they give a stipend, and they give you 3 free field trips to the Arboretum, and they provide buses, which is great because we don't have money for that in Cambridge. Or at least at our school, we don't have money set aside for bus trips. We have to raise it all. So it's an amazing program, and we did a 4-day course that was fascinating and fun, where we went through the whole process of what the kids will go through, and now we're doing those lessons in the class. But I'm thinking I can't do it again next year. I think you can only do it once, but I just feel like everything we learn in that we'll just start doing in the garden next year.
Oh, that's really fabulous that it's something that really enhances the garden. So Boston teachers, there are a number of Boston teachers on this call. You're even closer to the Arnold Arboretum. So Isabel, we'll put that down in the chat box, and that's a resource you should definitely check out. So Rosalind, can you close us up with an answer to this question about how the garden helps your younger students become keen or keener observers?
Well, sometimes I'll have them take their journals with them and look at the last drawing that they did and go back to that place and see if they can add on to the drawing and make it more, define it more and add more illustrations to the same exact thing. And then other times I will ask them to find something different that they haven't seen before and draw it, and don't tell us about it. When you come back to the room, show your drawing and describe it and see if other people, by your description, as as clear as you can make it by your description and your drawing, if other people can guess what you're drawing. Or sometimes I'll ask them, like have a little scavenger hunt, and I'll tell them ask them to find a couple of things that I've already located in the garden, and they have to find it and draw it. And I think this has helped. I think they're studying the worms and seeing the differences and similarities between them has really helped us because we study animals, and I think my kids do become more cognizant of the differences and being able to compare things, and I think it carries through for the year.
Thank you. That's great to hear, and it just strikes me that those are things that you can do with older grades too. That's not just the junior kindergarten kind of strategy. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
Is there time to add one little thing?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Isabel.
Just a little sample of things we're doing now because of the Nature Me program is everybody in the class has made a color chart. They just took every crayon in the crayon box and they made a family, like the blue family, the green family, and they put a dot for each shade and then the name of the shade. So they have these cards that have like 60 different dots. So that now when they describe something, they can say it's tumbleweed or it's sepia. So they're getting very precise with their words. And I'm finding them doing it even when I'm not asking them to do that. They really want to be exact. And so once they have a tool like that, it allows them to be keener because now they have the words for it. And I'm thinking the more we kind of give them words ahead of time or talk about what are some ways we can talk about edges or what are some ways, because they see things but they don't know how to say it. And sometimes they can draw something they can't say, but I think it's a great way to build their vocabulary.
Oh, I love that, Isabel. Turning it around so it's less about making students more keen and more about allowing them to be keen, to articulate the keen that they already are, the keen observers that they already are. That's really cool. Okay, well, thank you all so much for your comments and questions. And I just want to point out in the chat box that Isabel added some information, and Mary Alicia, I think you're from Boston. You've added more information down there. So read the whole line there. There's information from both Mary Alicia and from Isabel about that Arboretum resource, which sounds like a really great thing. Okay, so we've got just a couple things before we close out and say goodbye. I want to remind you that everyone on this call will get professional development credit. Everyone will get a certificate by email that you've participated in this hour. In addition, Cambridge and Boston teachers, you can register for this session and get district credit for participating too. If you haven't participated in the first 2 sessions and you haven't been in touch with us, please get in touch with Mike or me, and we can help you get you set up for that. Next, we've got 2 more really great sessions here coming up. We've got 3 teachers talking about using harvest time in the garden next Thursday, and the following Thursday for our last session, we've got 2 more older grade teachers, 5th and 6th grade teacher talking about using the garden for science and technology, a teacher from Boston and one from Cambridge. But I hope that you're finding, teachers and educators, as I'm hearing, how much of the lessons that a teacher presents on can also be used in different grades. I know older grades, for instance, do a lot of worm work, usually calling it vermiculture, but it sounds very similar to a lot of the things that Rosalind's doing with her junior kindergartners. And I know that younger grades, too, are also working on simple machines. So it seems like there's good crossover. And then lastly, I want to start reminding you all to put this on your calendar. You're going to get a chance to meet each other face-to-face. Genzyme Corporation is hosting a lovely reception for us on November 13th with refreshments and drinks, and we're really looking forward to seeing all of you there. So put it on your calendar now, and we'll remind you again, but please plan to be there. So thank you all so much for being part of CitySprouts Teacher Forum. Thank you very much, Rosalind and Isabel, for being our most excellent presenters today, and to Holly for speaking on behalf of the Boston Public School Science Department. So we'll see and hear you all in next week on Thursday. Thank you.